Hello, and thank you for listening. My name is Avery Morgan. At 23, I walked away from wealth, legacy, and the law career my family demanded, choosing sound over silence, a shipping container over a penthouse. To them, I was a failure, a disgrace, but the music they once mocked as meaningless noise began helping millions of strangers find calm, and years later, my own family unknowingly paid to experience it too. If you've ever been dismissed for following your passion, my story might be exactly what you need to hear today. The chandelier above cast shadows across faces I'd known my entire life, but tonight they felt like strangers wearing familiar masks. Christopher's engagement party at the plaza, all marble columns and champagne flutes that cost more than most people's rent. I stood near the window, watching Manhattan glitter below like a circuit board of ambition, when Charlotte's voice cut through the classical quartet like nails on glass. "So Avery, what exactly do you do for work now?" Her diamond engagement ring caught the light as she gestured, and I knew this wasn't curiosity, this was a performance, and I was the opening act before my own execution. Mother appeared beside her like a shadow materializing, Pamela Morgan in her signature black Armani, the same shade she wore to court when she destroyed opposing counsel with surgical precision. "Avery makes sounds," she said, the word dropping like something distasteful she'd found on her Louboutin heel. "Electronic music, I believe." The way she said electronic made it sound like a sexually transmitted disease she was embarrassed to diagnose. Her fingers tightened around her champagne flute, knuckles white with the effort of maintaining composure. Christopher joined our little circle, loosening his Hermes tie. The golden boy, fresh from winning another impossible case, still high on courtroom victory and entitled confidence. His laugh was sharp enough to cut diamond, practiced and cruel in the way only private school education could perfect. "Come on, Ave. What do you actually do? Make beats for teenagers in their bedrooms? Help them study for their SATs?" The condescension dripped from his words like honey laced with arsenic. I could see him mentally calculating how this conversation would play at the country club, how he'd spin my failure into his success story. "I mean, we're all family here. You can tell us the truth about this hobby phase you're going through." The room had gone quiet now, conversation dying like flowers in winter. Aunt Margaret leaned forward from her perch near the bar. Uncle James adjusted his glasses with the anticipation of a man watching a car accident in slow motion. Even the waitstaff seemed to slow their pace, sensing blood in the water and wanting to witness the feast. Charlotte giggled behind her champagne, the sound like breaking glass wrapped in silk. "She's still living in someone's basement, right? In Seattle?" "I heard it's one of those artist commune things where everyone shares a bathroom and pretends poverty is enlightening." Her voice carried that particular Upper East Side cruelty, wrapped in designer fabric and soaked in generational wealth. I felt every eye in the room on me, waiting for the breakdown, the tears, the dramatic exit they'd all whisper about for months at their dinner parties and charity galas. They wanted me to crumble, to validate their choices by proving mine were disasters. Instead, I smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes but says everything you need it to say. The kind Mother had taught me before she decided I wasn't worth teaching anymore. "Actually," I said, my voice steady as granite and twice as hard, "I work in sound design, ambient compositions mostly, therapeutic audio experiences for stress relief and meditation." Christopher rolled his eyes so dramatically I was surprised they didn't fall out of his head and roll across the marble floor. "Noise pollution, you mean? What's next, selling essential oils on Instagram? Starting a crystal healing practice?" The laughter rippled through our family like dominoes falling, each chuckle another nail in the coffin of our relationship. But I wasn't finished. I took a sip of my sparkling water, the only thing in this room that didn't cost a fortune or come with strings attached. The only pure thing in a space built on compromise and pretense. "You know what's funny," I said, my voice cutting through their amusement like a blade through silk, each word carefully chosen and perfectly weighted. "For the past 2 years, you've been listening to my music every morning when you take the elevator up to your offices in this building." The laughter died like someone had pulled the plug on life support. Charlotte's smile froze mid-giggle, her face a mask of confusion and growing horror. Christopher's face went blank, his lawyer brain already calculating implications. Mother's champagne glass paused halfway to her lips, suspended in disbelief like everything else in this moment. That soft piano melody with the rain sounds that plays from 7 to 11 a.m. That's mine. Track 7 from my urban meditation series. The building management licensed it specifically for stress reduction during peak hours. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the traffic 40 floors below, the whisper of expensive fabric shifting against leather seats, the soft click of Charlotte's engagement ring against her champagne flute. Turns out my noise pollution is exactly what this city's most successful people need to start their day without having a nervous breakdown. 4 years earlier, I stood in this same apartment, holding my acceptance letter from the Berlin Institute for Sound Arts, like it was both a lottery ticket and a suicide note. The paper felt weightless in my hands, but the words on it were heavy enough to sink ships and destroy dynasties. "You're throwing your life away," Mother said, her voice sharp enough to draw blood from stone. She'd been pacing for an hour, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a metronome counting down to disaster, each step marking another second of my defiance. The Persian rug beneath her feet had witnessed 3 generations of Morgan family arguments, but none quite like this. Father sat behind his mahogany desk, the one that had witnessed 3 generations of Morgan family decisions, victories, and the occasional necessary sacrifice. He hadn't looked up from his papers since I'd shown him the letter. His silence more damning than any lecture. "Berlin," he said finally, like he was pronouncing the name of a plague-ridden medieval city. "To study what, exactly? How to press buttons on a computer. How to make noise that college students listen to while they smoke marijuana." His fountain pen scratched against legal documents, each stroke another nail in the coffin of our relationship, another signature on contracts that mattered more than his daughter's dreams. Christopher leaned against the bookshelf, arms crossed, playing the part of disappointed older brother with Oscar-worthy precision. He'd changed from his work clothes into casual wear, but even his casual clothes cost more than most people's formal attire. "Avery, think about this rationally," he said, using his courtroom voice, the one that convinced juries and intimidated witnesses into submission. "Music is a hobby. Law is a legacy. This family has built something real, something lasting. You can't just throw that away for some European art school fantasy." His words carried the weight of tradition, of expectations, of a future already written in legal briefs and family letterhead. "It's sound engineering," I said, hating how small my voice sounded in this cavernous room with its 20-foot ceilings and walls lined with law books that cost more than cars. Acoustic design, audio production, spatial sound installation, it's not just music, it's architecture. I'll be working with museums, galleries, therapeutic facilities. It's a real career. Mother's laugh cut me off, bitter as burnt coffee and twice as acidic. "Installation? You mean those pretentious gallery pieces where people pretend to understand modern art while sipping wine that costs more than the artwork itself?" She pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to fixing problems with money and connections. "I'm calling Dean Morrison right now. There's still time to accept Yale. We can make a donation to smooth over this embarrassment, maybe fund a scholarship in your name, turn this whole mess into something positive for the family reputation." But I was already backing toward the door, the acceptance letter clutched against my chest like armor, like the only thing standing between me and complete annihilation. "I leave for Berlin in 3 weeks, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice had become, how clear my conviction sounded even in this room designed to crush dissent. Father's pen stopped moving, Mother's phone froze mid-dial. Christopher pushed off from the bookshelf, finally engaged, his casual pose evaporating into something that looked almost like panic. "Avery, think about this," he said, his voice losing its courtroom confidence for just a moment. "Music is a hobby. Law is a legacy. You can't build a life on something so unstable." The silence stretched between us like a chasm, like the space between 2 continents, drifting apart over geological time. Then Father spoke without looking up, his voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "If you walk out that door to chase this fantasy, don't expect us to catch you when you fall. This family doesn't enable failure, and we don't reward rebellion." Mother nodded, already reaching for her checkbook, her movements sharp and decisive. "Credit cards, trust fund, emergency fund. Everything stops today. You want to be an artist? Learn to starve like one. Learn what the real world costs when you don't have family money to cushion your mistakes. The pen scratched again, but this time it sounded like erasure, like my name being crossed out of the family ledger one stroke at a time. 23 years of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations, and graduation ceremonies. All of it reduced to the sound of ink on paper, marking the end of everything I'd ever known about belonging somewhere. The shipping container in Seattle's International District wasn't much to look at from the outside. Rusted blue metal with Korean characters I couldn't read and couldn't afford to translate. But inside, I'd built something beautiful from desperation and determination. Soundproofing foam covered every surface like technological barnacles. Cables snaked across the concrete floor like electronic ivy, and my equipment sat arranged like a shrine to possibility. The space smelled like metal and hope, like rain and the distant promise of trains carrying people to better places. During the day, I pulled espresso shots at grind coffee, my hands moving on autopilot, while my mind composed symphonies from the hiss of steam and the grinding of beans, the gentle percussion of cups against saucers. At night, I disappeared into my container universe, where silence was just another instrument waiting to be played, where the absence of sound carried as much weight as its presence. I'd spend hours recording the most mundane sounds, the whisper of pages turning, the soft thud of footsteps on wet pavement, the distant hum of air conditioning units creating an urban drone that most people never noticed. Then I'd layer them, manipulate them, find the music hidden in the noise of living. My neighbors thought I was crazy. This girl in thrift store clothes carrying expensive recording equipment into a shipping container like some kind of electronic hermit. My first TikTok video was an accident, born from exhaustion and raw emotion. I'd been recording the sound of rain on the container's roof for 3 hours, layering it with the distant hum of freight trains and the soft whisper of my own breathing as I tried not to cry from loneliness. 30 seconds of pure atmosphere, no words, no explanation, no face to connect to the sound. Just a black screen with white text, for when the world gets too loud. I posted it at 2 a.m. and fell asleep to the sound of Seattle's sleepless symphony, the container walls keeping out everything except the possibility of connection. By morning, it had 10,000 views and comments I couldn't process. This saved my anxiety attack. Playing this on repeat while studying for finals. I didn't know I needed this until I heard it. Who is this? I need more. By the end of the week, 50,000 people had found solace in 30 seconds of my processed loneliness. Comments poured in like digital rain, each one a small validation that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely insane for thinking sound could heal the places words couldn't reach. I started posting regularly, each track a little experiment in emotional alchemy, turning my isolation into something others could use to feel less alone. The breakthrough came 6 months later with Library Pulse, a composition I'd built from the sound of pages turning, chairs scraping against floors, and the soft percussion of keyboards clicking in the University of Washington Library. I'd spent 3 nights recording in different sections, capturing the unique acoustic signature of knowledge being absorbed, of minds working in collective silence. The track was subtle, almost subliminal, designed to exist in the background of consciousness like a sonic security blanket. I uploaded it to SoundCloud at midnight, tagged it with nothing but study music and ambient, then went to sleep thinking maybe 50 people would listen to it. 2 weeks later, I was buying coffee when I heard it. My own composition, drifting from the speakers of a Bose headphone commercial on the cafe's mounted television. The same melody, the same layered whispers of concentration, but with no credit, no acknowledgement, no recognition that someone had created this from nothing, just music by various artists in tiny print during the end credits. My art reduced to stock music, my soul sold to sell someone else's product to the masses. I stood there with my latte growing cold, watching my heart being monetized by strangers who had no idea what it cost to create. The barista asked if I was okay, and I nodded, smiled, paid for my coffee with quarters, and walked back to my container with something burning in my chest that wasn't just anger. It was recognition, the first real proof that my work had value, even if that value was being stolen. That night, I recorded for 6 hours straight, pouring my rage and vindication into frequencies only I could hear, creating sounds that would make the thieves weep if they had the emotional intelligence to understand what they'd taken. The comments on Library Pulse kept growing. This is better than any study drug. My therapist asked what I've been listening to because I seem calmer. Whoever made this understands something the rest of the world doesn't. The pandemic changed everything, including the way people listen to the spaces between sounds. Suddenly, the world was too loud and too quiet at the same time, filled with Zoom calls that never ended and isolation that stretched like infinite silence, anxiety that buzzed at frequencies only certain people could hear, and endless scrolling through other people's curated happiness. My SoundCloud followers jumped from thousands to hundreds of thousands in a matter of weeks, each new subscriber representing someone drowning in the noise of a world that had forgotten how to be still. Comments became testimonials, desperate digital prayers. This got me through quarantine. I play your tracks during panic attacks, and my heart rate actually decreases. My mom has dementia, but she calms down when I play your rain sounds. I was becoming something I'd never intended to be. A soundtrack for healing, an anonymous voice for people who'd forgotten how to listen to silence. My daily uploads became rituals for thousands of people trying to survive a world that felt like it was ending in real time. Isolation Lullaby used recordings from empty subway stations. Ventilator Dreams transformed the mechanical breathing of hospital equipment into something almost peaceful. Social Distance Serenade layered the sounds of empty city streets with gentle synthesized warmth. Each track was a small rebellion against the chaos, a pocket of peace in an ocean of overwhelm. That's when the documentary filmmaker found me like a detective following digital breadcrumbs. Sarah Chen from Netflix, working on a series about digital wellness and the mental health crisis sweeping through quarantined America. Her email was professional but desperate, carrying the weight of someone trying to make sense of collective trauma. Your work is exactly what we need for this project. The way you use ambient sound to create emotional safety, it's revolutionary. People are using your compositions as therapy, as medicine, as survival tools. We need to tell this story. She offered more money than I'd made in 2 years of coffee shop wages. Enough to move out of the container. Enough to buy real equipment. Enough to stop counting quarters for groceries. But she wanted to meet in person. Wanted to put my face on screen. Wanted to turn my anonymous art into a brand with a biography and a marketing strategy. The thought made my skin crawl, like insects, made of anxiety. I declined, but countered with something else entirely, something that felt like protection and power in equal measure. You can have the music, I wrote back, my fingers steady on the keyboard for the first time in months. But I stay invisible. Credit me as sound sage and nothing else. The work speaks for itself, and the mystery is part of the medicine. Sarah agreed immediately, probably thinking she could convince me later to reveal my identity for the inevitable follow-up series. The documentary, Quiet Revolution, premiered to critical acclaim and trending hashtags that made my anonymous heart race with pride and terror. My compositions underscored every emotional moment, every testimonial about anxiety and digital overwhelm, every interview with therapists and wellness experts, trying to make sense of a world that had forgotten how to be quiet. Suddenly, Sahart's sound sage was everywhere, my invisible presence becoming a phenomenon that existed entirely in the space between silence and sound. The offers started pouring in like digital rain, each email representing another chance to compromise or another opportunity to maintain my integrity. Meditation apps wanted exclusive licenses to my entire catalog. Luxury hotels wanted custom ambient tracks for their spas, promising to credit Sound Sage in the finest print possible. A major pharmaceutical company wanted to sponsor a series of therapeutic soundscapes to accompany their anxiety medication marketing campaign. I said no to most of them, yes to a few that felt right, learning to trust my instincts about which opportunities would feed my art and which would devour it. My prices went up, my standards got higher, and my container studio started feeling less like a refuge and more like a launching pad for something I couldn't yet name. But with every success, I felt the weight of what I'd left behind in Manhattan. Not the money or the status. Those had never been mine to begin with. It was the silence where my family's pride should have been, the empty space where their support should have echoed. The breaking point came when Apple reached out through 3 different intermediaries, each more expensive than the last, wanting me to design the default soundscape for their new meditation device. Not just license existing tracks, but create something entirely new, something that would reach millions of users around the world who didn't even know they needed healing. Brooklyn wasn't Seattle, but it had its own kind of music. Subway trains like metallic heartbeats carrying 8 million dreams through underground arteries, sirens that sang of urban urgency and human drama, the polyglot symphony of voices learning to harmonize in languages that had never shared the same air before. I found the space in Dumbo through a real estate agent who specialized in what she called artistic industrial, an old warehouse with 20-foot ceilings and enough square footage to build something unprecedented. The building had housed everything from textiles to tech startups, but it had never held anything like what I was planning to create. The Resonance wasn't just a studio or a gallery. It was a temple to the idea that listening could be as powerful as speaking, that silence could teach what noise never could. I spent 6 months designing every acoustic detail, every curve of sound-absorbing foam, every precisely calibrated speaker hidden behind black fabric walls like technological prayers. The construction crew thought I was insane, demanding tolerances measured in millimeters, acoustic specifications that required equipment they'd never heard of. But I had Apple money now, and Apple money could make insanity seem perfectly reasonable. The concept was radical in its simplicity, revolutionary in its restraint. Visitors surrendered their phones at the door like digital weapons, checking their connection to the outside world the way old churches required you to check your hat. Then they entered a completely lightless room with 12 reclining chairs arranged in a circle, each one positioned according to mathematical principles of spatial audio that I'd learned from German engineers who treated sound like architecture. For 60 minutes, they experienced what I called curated silence, compositions that began with recognizable sounds and gradually deconstructed them into pure emotion, pure experience, pure presence. My first installation, Urban Lullaby, used recordings I'd made across 5 boroughs, over 3 months of careful hunting. Construction sites at dawn when the city was still dreaming, children playing in Washington Square Park while their parents scrolled through phones, the last subway train of the night carrying insomniacs and shift workers through tunnels that echoed with a century of human movement. But instead of presenting them as chaos, I wove them into something that felt like being held by the city itself, like New York was singing its inhabitants to sleep after a long day of survival. Visitors would enter stressed and leave transformed, many of them in tears they couldn't explain, struggling to describe what they'd experienced in a language that had no words for the feeling of being completely heard without saying a word. It was like hearing the city's heartbeat, one woman told me, her voice soft with something that might have been awe, like New York was singing me to sleep. Like all that noise and chaos was actually a lullaby I'd never learned to hear. The waiting list grew from weeks to months, appointments becoming currency in a city where everything valuable was also scarce. Word spread through the art world like wildfire, fed by digital wind. Gallery owners, critics, and collectors started making appointments, but I kept the sessions small and intimate, sacred in their limitation. 12 people maximum, 3 sessions per day, appointment only, no exceptions for money or influence or connections. The exclusivity wasn't about elitism, it was about preservation, about maintaining the integrity of the experience in a world that wanted to package and mass-produce every moment of authentic connection. Vogue called it the most exclusive meditation experience in America. The New York Times art critic wrote a piece titled "When Silence Becomes Luxury," describing my work as acoustic architecture for the soul. The Apple collaboration launched during the Resonance's 3rd month of operation, my compositions becoming the default soundscape for their new wellness device, reaching millions of users worldwide who had no idea they were experiencing the same artistic vision that people paid $200 to encounter in my Brooklyn warehouse. I watched the user reviews flood in like digital testimonials. 5 stars, stories about better sleep and reduced anxiety, comments about finding peace in chaos, about discovering that healing could happen in the space between heartbeats. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd created 2 completely different ways to experience the same thing, one exclusive and experiential, the other democratic and digital. But success in the art world comes with its own kind of noise, its own demands for compromise and explanation. Investors wanted to franchise The Resonance, to turn my singular vision into a chain of profitable wellness centers. Record labels wanted to sign Sound Sage, sight unseen, offering contracts that would turn my art into content, my healing into product. Wellness influencers begged for partnerships and endorsements, promising millions of followers who would buy anything I told them to buy. Through it all, I remained invisible, a ghost in my own success story, watching my influence grow, while my identity remained mine, alone. My assistant Maya handled the business side, with the protective instincts of a guard dog. My sound engineer James managed the technical aspects with the precision of a surgeon, and I remained what I'd always been. A voice without a face, a presence felt but never seen, a mystery that had become more powerful than any revelation could ever be. The brand had become bigger than I'd ever imagined possible, and somehow, impossibly, it still belonged entirely to me. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning like a ghost returning from the past, sender unknown but somehow familiar. Christopher Morgan, Esquitours, requesting a private resonance experience for exclusive corporate wellness event. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes, reading and rereading the formal language that could have been copied from any of his legal briefs. He had no idea. After 4 years of silence, after crossing my name out of the family ledger, after treating my art like a contagious disease, he was asking to pay me $5,000 for an hour of what he'd once called noise pollution. The details made my chest tight with something between laughter and nausea. Celebrating our mother's 60th birthday with a unique wellness experience for 12 family members and close friends. We understand your establishment provides therapeutic sound experiences for stress reduction and emotional clarity. Mrs. Pamela Morgan has been dealing with work-related anxiety, and we've heard exceptional things about your innovative approach to mental health through audio therapy. The irony was so thick I could taste it like copper pennies on my tongue. Maya knocked on my office door, holding a printed copy of the email with eyebrows raised so high they'd practically left her forehead. "Boss, you need to see this. The name on the credit card matches the name on your emergency contact form from when you first rented the warehouse." She'd done her research, cross-referenced the information like the former private investigator she was before becoming my business manager. "Christopher Morgan, same address as the penthouse apartment you listed as your childhood home. This is your family, isn't it?" I nodded, my throat too tight for words, watching 4 years of carefully constructed independence crumble with the weight of recognition. They thought they were booking a trendy wellness experience, probably something they'd read about in New York Magazine or heard recommended at some charity luncheon. They had no idea they were about to pay their disowned daughter to guide them through an hour of the very thing they'd mocked her for creating. "Schedule them for next Friday evening," I told Maya, my voice steadier than my hands. 7 p.m., the full treatment. The request included a note about bringing our youngest son's girlfriend from Stanford. And I realized they'd replaced me so completely that new people were filling the space where I used to stand in family photos. But this wasn't about replacement or revenge. This was about completion, about a circle finally closing after years of spinning in broken orbits. I spent the week crafting something special, a composition that would speak directly to their souls, in frequencies they wouldn't recognize until it was too late to close their ears. They arrived in a cluster of expensive coats and nervous energy, voices echoing in the warehouse space, like they were afraid of being heard by the wrong people. I watched from behind one-way glass as Maya checked them in, taking their phones with the practiced efficiency of someone disarming dangerous weapons. Mother looked older, silver threading through her perfect hair like time had finally caught up with her. Christopher had gained weight around his middle, success settling into his body like comfortable resignation. Charlotte clung to his arm, scanning the space with the suspicious eyes of someone accustomed to judging everything by its price tag. The new girlfriend, Jessica, according to the intake form, was younger than I'd expected. Probably 22, and clearly uncomfortable in clothes that cost more than most people's cars. She kept glancing around like she was afraid someone would discover she didn't belong here, which made her the most honest person in the room. Father wasn't there, and I realized with a pang that felt like old bruises being pressed that I hadn't even wondered about his absence until this moment. Some bridges burn so completely you forget they ever existed. Please take your seats in the circle, Maya instructed, her voice carrying the authority of someone who managed millionaires and celebrities without flinching. For the next 60 minutes, you'll experience a journey designed specifically for this group. Remember, no talking, no movement except to adjust for comfort. Let the sound take you where it needs to take you. I watched them settle into the chairs, Mother choosing the one directly facing the hidden speakers, Christopher immediately checking his watch, despite having surrendered his phone. The lights dimmed to complete darkness, and I began with something deceptively simple, the sound of a door closing, recorded in this very warehouse 3 years ago when I first signed the lease. Then came the drip of water, not from any faucet but from the leaky pipe in the basement of our old Manhattan apartment, the one Father never fixed because he was always too busy with more important things. Layer by layer, I built a soundscape from their own lives, memories they wouldn't recognize as memories until the music made them remember. 15 minutes in, I heard the first sharp intake of breath. 20 minutes, a soft sob from the direction where Mother was sitting. By 30 minutes, I could feel the emotional temperature of the room changing, the rigid postures softening as sound did what words had never been able to do: bypass their defenses and speak directly to the parts of themselves they'd forgotten how to hear. The composition moved through childhood lullabies they'd sung to me, through the sound of rain on the windows during family dinners, through the whisper of pages turning in bedtime stories. Then came the voice. My voice, but processed through filters that made it sound like memory itself was speaking. Your path doesn't need approval, only presence. The words I'd recorded one sleepless night in the container, talking to myself because there was no one else to listen. Mom, I made it. Even without you. Mother's breathing changed, became ragged with recognition she couldn't quite place. Brother, I forgave you before you asked. Christopher shifted in his chair, his lawyer brain trying to process evidence his heart had already accepted. The final 10 minutes were pure silence. Not empty silence, but pregnant silence, the kind that holds space for everything that needs to be said without words. When the lights slowly returned, revealing their faces streaked with tears they couldn't explain, I stepped out from behind the glass and into the light that had always been mine to claim. I stepped into the circle of light wearing the same black clothes I'd always worn, but somehow they felt like armor now instead of camouflage. The silence stretched like elastic about to snap. 12 faces turning toward me with expressions that ranged from confusion to recognition to something that might have been shame. Mother's hand flew to her throat, her mouth opening and closing without sound like she was drowning in air. Avery! The word came out as barely a whisper, my name foreign on her tongue after years of not speaking it. I nodded once, slow and deliberate, letting the confirmation settle into their bones, like truth finally finding its way home. Christopher's face cycled through emotions like a slot machine. Denial, anger, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like respect. Charlotte's grip on his arm tightened, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve, as if she could anchor herself to something solid in a world that had suddenly tilted off its axis. The Stanford girlfriend, Jessica, looked between us with the wide eyes of someone watching a family secret explode in real time. Thank you, I said, my voice carrying across the space, with the same clarity that had guided them through their emotional journey for the past hour. The resonance has always been about being heard in silence, about finding the frequency where understanding lives, even when words fail us. Maya stepped forward from the shadows, her professional smile never wavering, ready to escort them out if this moment turned ugly. But I held up a hand, claiming this space, claiming this moment, claiming the right to speak that I'd bought with 4 years of survival. Christopher was the first to find his voice, his lawyer instincts kicking in like muscle memory. How long have you known? About us coming here, I mean. Did you plan this? His questions came sharp and fast, but underneath the accusation I could hear something else. Curiosity, maybe even admiration for the precision of the trap I'd set. Sao em kong noi? We're family, Avery. You should have told us. We could have. We should have. His voice trailed off as he realized there was no end to that sentence that didn't incriminate him. Family doesn't need achievements to listen to each other, I said, the words carrying 4 years of therapy and self-discovery and learning to love myself in languages my family had never taught me. But apparently, it needed $5,000 and a reputation you could Google. Mother flinched as if I'd slapped her, which maybe I had, with truth sharper than any physical blow. You've been listening to my music in your elevator for 2 years. You just never thought to wonder who created the piece you needed to start your day. The silence that followed was different from the curated silence of my installation. It was raw, unprocessed, full of jagged edges and uncomfortable truths. Mother stepped forward, her designer heels clicking against the concrete floor like tiny hammers driving nails into coffins of old assumptions. "We were wrong," she said, and the words seemed to cost her something valuable, something she wasn't sure she could afford to spend. "Not wrong about your choices, wrong about not trying to understand them, wrong about making love conditional on approval." I studied her face, looking for the trap, the manipulation, the legal loophole that would let her take back the words once they'd served their purpose. But all I saw was my mother, stripped of her courtroom armor, standing in my cathedral of sound, and finally hearing her daughter's voice after 4 years of willful deafness. "I'm not the same person who left for Berlin," I said quietly. "And you're not the same people who watched me go. Maybe that's not a tragedy. Maybe that's just growth." The dinner invitation came 3 days later, handwritten on Mother's personal stationery, the first communication from my family that wasn't filtered through lawyers or assistants, or the cold efficiency of electronic correspondence. "Would you join us for Sunday dinner? Just family. No celebration, no agenda. Just us." The handwriting was shakier than I remembered, age and perhaps uncertainty making her usually perfect script look almost vulnerable. I stared at the cream-colored paper for an hour, feeling the weight of 4 years of Sunday dinners I'd eaten alone in my container studio. When I arrived at the penthouse, nothing had changed except everything. The same Persian rugs, the same marble surfaces, the same view of Central Park that had watched our family grow up and grow apart. But the energy was different, careful, tentative, like everyone was walking on glass that might shatter if they stepped too hard. No champagne, no cocktail hour performance of success and status. Just water glasses and herbal tea, as if they'd finally learned that some conversations require sobriety. They'd set a place for me at the table, but not my old seat at the foot where the youngest child traditionally sat like a decorative afterthought. Instead, they'd given me a seat between Mother and Christopher, a position that acknowledged I was no longer the family member who needed protection from adult conversations. Jessica sat across from me, still wide-eyed from the revelation that the family's black sheep was actually a wolf in designer clothing, successful beyond their ability to measure or dismiss. "We want to make things right," Christopher said, his lawyer voice softened by something that might have been genuine remorse. "Charlotte and I would be honored if you'd design the sound for our wedding. Full creative control, whatever fee you think is appropriate. We want to celebrate our beginning with the art you've created." The offer hung in the air like expensive perfume, beautiful and suffocating in equal measure. I could see the calculation behind his eyes. This was his way of publicly claiming me, of turning my success into a reflection of his good judgment. I set down my water glass with deliberate precision, the sound sharp enough to cut through the careful politeness that had settled over the table like dust on expensive furniture. "I'll come to your wedding as a guest, if I'm invited as family, but I won't perform my art to validate your choices. The Resonance isn't a wedding planner, and SoundSage isn't available for hire to make your special day more special." The words came out cleaner than I'd expected, without anger or bitterness, just boundaries drawn in permanent ink. Mother's intake of breath was sharp enough to draw blood, but she didn't speak. Charlotte's face flushed red above her silk blouse, the first crack in her perfect composure since I'd known her. "We're not asking you to perform," Christopher said, his voice getting that edge it got when judges questioned his arguments. "We're asking you to be part of our family celebration, to share your gift with people who love you." But the word love sounded rusty in his mouth, like something he'd forgotten how to pronounce correctly. "Love doesn't require performance," I said, borrowing wisdom from 4 years of learning to love myself without an audience, and family doesn't need special occasions to show up for each other. If you want me at your wedding, invite me. If you want me in your life, show up in mine. But don't confuse hiring my talent with healing our relationship. The silence that followed was pregnant with the possibility of real change, or the certainty of real distance. For the first time in my life, I was comfortable with either outcome. 3 weeks later, I sat in my office above the resonance at 2 a.m. The city quiet enough that I could hear my own heartbeat, mixed with the distant hum of traffic that never really stopped in New York. In front of me was my latest piece of equipment, not a synthesizer or a recording device, but a simple digital recorder, the kind journalists use for interviews. Tonight, I wasn't creating art for other people to experience. Tonight, I was creating something for myself, a sonic diary entry that would never see SoundCloud or TikTok or the inside of anyone else's ears. I pressed record and began to speak into the darkness, my voice joining the ambient symphony of a building that had learned to hold silence like a sacred thing. Day 1, 8:47 since I left home. Day 1, 205 since I stopped counting the days. My words mixed with the soft whisper of the ventilation system, the distant rumble of the subway, the gentle creak of old wooden beams settling into themselves like bones, finding comfort after a long day of holding weight. I used to think success meant being heard, I continued, my voice finding its rhythm in the space between heartbeats. I thought if enough people listened to my music, if enough critics wrote about my work, if enough money changed hands because of sounds I'd pulled from silence, then I'd finally be worth the space I took up in the world. Outside, a siren wailed past, someone else's emergency becoming part of my meditation, proof that the city never stopped teaching lessons about resilience to anyone willing to listen. But sitting in this space I'd built from nothing but vision and stubbornness, surrounded by equipment that turned my emotions into experiences other people could share, I understood something I'd been too young to know when I first picked up a recording device in that shipping container. Success isn't about being heard, I said to the darkness that held my words like a prayer. Success is about creating space for silence, then filling it with something true. It's about learning to listen to yourself so clearly that when you finally speak, the whole world stops to hear what you have to say. The final layer of my composition was pure silence, not empty silence, but full silence, pregnant with possibility and rich with the understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. When you've learned to be comfortable in your own quiet, when you've made peace with the space between your thoughts, when you've built a life so authentic that it resonates at frequencies other people can feel in their bones, that's when you discover the difference between making noise and making music. I stopped recording and sat in the darkness of my cathedral, listening to New York breathe around me like a living thing. In the morning, Maya would arrive with coffee and the day's schedule. James would start setting up for the afternoon sessions. 12 more people would surrender their phones and their armor and learn to hear themselves in the space between silence and sound. But right now, in this moment that belonged entirely to me, I was exactly where I'd always been meant to be, not performing for anyone else's approval, but simply existing in the frequency where authenticity lives, where the sound of my own voice was finally enough. Thank you for listening to Avery's story, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay true to your authentic voice, even when the world tells you it's not worth hearing. Your dreams, your art, your unique way of seeing the world, they matter more than anyone else's approval. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear that their path is valid, even if it's different from what others expect. Remember, you don't need permission to be yourself. And you don't need an audience to be extraordinary. The world is waiting for the sound only you can make.